Well, they know that an allegation of sexual abuse is like poison. It's like a poison pill. And they will actually tell mothers, don't even bring this up. You know, we have that old CNN tape of the woman saying, I wish I'd never reported this. You know, I wish I'd never even reported it, because now I've lost my child. And it would be better if this were happening and I at least had my child and I could comfort her and I could, maybe try to heal some of the damage. Now I've lost her completely. So, it's amazing that we have mandated reporters who are actually breaking the law when they don't report it themselves, and now they're, breaking the law further by telling the mother, that she can't talk.
Attorneys aren't mandated reporters.
No, I know that. I know that. So the mandated reporters, oh, I'm sorry, that was confusing. The biggest group of people who told the mother not to talk were the attorneys, and they are not mandated reporters. But there were court personnel, there were counselors, there were mediators, and they all are mandated reporters who also told mothers not to report. Thank you for clarifying that, yeah.
I actually had an attorney tell me that until my daughter got pregnant, no one would believe me about the sexual abuse.
Oh, that's,
Attorney told me that until my daughter got pregnant, no one would believe me about the sexual abuse.
What we're telling each other is our children are safer with us 50% of the time than without us 100%.
so that's exactly, and you'll see that that's what the mothers reported to us, that they had given up feeling they could protect the child and feeling like the best they could do was just maintaining, at this point, giving up and maintaining a certain kind of silence about abuse they know is going on, they at least could maintain contact with the child. That's Sophie's choice. That is a heartbreaking, heart-rendering choice, because every parent's feeling is they want to protect their child. And the mother, is often judged very negatively in court for reacting so emotionally to the court's decision not to protect her child. I asked one of these psychologists who's on the PAS team, or whatever we call that group of psychologists who believe and report PAS, and I said to him, he's telling me how hysterical and, out of touch with reality and delusional these mothers are. So I said to him, so what is your baseline? Can you tell me what the baseline response is of a parent who's ordered to turn their child over to someone they believe may rape them? How would the normal, typical parent react to that? How would you react to that? And he looked at me like, I never thought of that. Hello? If we're going to say that the mother's reaction is somehow showing that she's mentally unstable, then you've got to show me a baseline of how people react when they are forced to turn their children over to someone they think is going to molest them sexually. And he finally said, well, I think that I would, maybe do something to a person if I believed that that was going to happen. So clearly, we don't have a baseline. These people are not thinking, what would the reaction be? How would I react if I had to turn my child over to a molester for the weekend? Because I think that reaction would be very much, in fact, I'm amazed at the amount of self-control that mothers often show, just as you say, recognizing that they have to do this for their children, and the pain and agony of turning your child over to someone you think is going to hurt them. Nobody's done a baseline on what the normal reaction to that would be. But I think that's the question they should be asking if they're going to talk about how the mother is behaving. Okay. They lost custody with no court reporter present, and Linda talked about that. Almost 72% were not represented at some point by an attorney. Now, all of them had an attorney at some point, I believe. We'll probably have to go back and check that for sure. But all of them, or nearly all of them, it's not like mothers just decide, okay, I can handle this myself. I'm going to go into court and be my own representative. They end up representing themselves because they've run out of money, in desperation. And when they do that, they're in big trouble, as Nancy's data will show you. And almost 58% were not permitted to see the evaluation or the recommendation that led often to their child being removed from them. So it's very hard to rebut when you're not even really given the information. Okay, so these are the mandated reporters. So you see it's the attorney, but look at all the other people. Advocates, court personnel, mediators. Those are all mandated reporters who are essentially not reporting it themselves and telling the mother, advising her not to report. Okay, next slide. Okay, so these are some of the outcomes. Over 89% reported domestic violence, so we're very convinced that domestic violence is very wedded to this process. And we had more domestic violence cases than child sexual abuse cases. So the domestic violence seems to be very much at the heart of this. 59% continue to experience violence after separation. So we know this, and we know that when mothers raise the issue of continuing harassment and violence after separation, the courts often accuse her of living in the past and bringing up old history and not moving on, and they very rarely recognize and protect her, even though the data shows that women are in the most danger from their batterers at the time of separation up to a year after separation. So that's what we know, that's the data, and yet courts ignore that and don't protect her, don't protect the children. 98% believe that they were discredited for their attempts to protect their children. 96% believe that the court personnel ignored or minimized the allegations of abuse. 42% were labeled as having PAS. Another 33% were labeled as being alienators. Sometimes there is some overlap here because sometimes mothers reported being accused of both. 66, almost 67% lost custody as the result of the psychological evaluation. So as Linda Bernard said, the evaluators are extremely problematic in this process. They think they can tell who's telling the truth. They think they can tell whether the child's been abused, whether the father is a perpetrator, whether the mother is telling the truth, and they can't. They're no better than the general public at doing that. Yeah.
What's interesting to see is that only 33% were labeled alienators when that used to be, I think, more.
Well, remember that 42% were labeled as PAS, and alienator, what I found is that sometimes psychologists and mediators who sort of like the alienator thing, it explains a lot of things for them or simplifies things for them, but its PAS has been discredited in a lot of literature. So then they drop the PAS and they just say, well, she's an alienator, and kind of make it more generalized. So that's how I saw that, although a few women reported both, that they'd both been called alienator by one person and having PAS by another. So that is lower than, I mean, obviously there are a lot of women having trouble who don't necessarily get that label. So it's not that label alone. That label is problematic. And you'll see in our statistics that it actually turned out not to necessarily be predictive. So a lot of women are having trouble even when they don't get that label, which I think is something for us to sort of mull over and continue to think about. Yeah, and then I'll get back to you again.
Does everybody here know what PAS stands for?
Does everyone know parental alienation syndrome? This was suggested by a guy named Richard Gardner in the 1980s. Everybody knows about that? Yes, you were going to say.
My point with that is because people have stood up against him and said this really isn't sound, this syndrome isn't a sound syndrome. Maybe those numbers have gone down. I think it's what's showing is that the more people stand up and say this isn't accurate, the more these numbers can go down. So I bet that number used to be higher in the early 1880s after these surveys.
I mean, one of the things that we could do, we could go back and look at whether or not the early questionnaires we got, because we started in the early 2000, right around 2000 or 2001, we could look at whether the earlier ones are different than the later ones. Actually, that's a great suggestion for another thing we could do to mine this data. We could look at it, because it's been such a long time, we could look at it temporally and see if that's changing. But as I said, and I want to get to Nancy in just a second, as she'll show you, the things that most predicted the mother losing custody was not this label. It was some other factors. And so that's the problem. So as some judges won't even allow PAS to be introduced, or there's some very good people like Linda Bernard who will go and blow them out of the ground. I mean, that's why Sacramento, my guess is that she's not real popular with the evaluators in Sacramento, because that was a group of people that were very wedded to PAS. And maybe they're having more trouble introducing it now. That might well be the case. We could ask Linda about that. Linda, is it your impression that the courts and evaluators are using PAS per se less often now, since it's somewhat discredited?
Well, what they're doing is just changing the name.
Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. And that's the alienator thing.
The same thing, just calling it different.
Yeah, so I think that's the alienator label. And that was my impression too, so that's a problem. Okay, let's go on. All right, 65% believe that their children are still being abused at the time that they filled out the questionnaire. 86% of the children continue to report abuse, right? 85% of the mothers no longer believe that they can protect their children. 58% have stopped reporting the abuse for fear that contact with their children will be terminated. Exactly what you said. Exactly. Okay. Okay, so this is the custody outcome. 54% have primary custody with supervision to the ex-partner. 5.4. I'm sorry. It's 5.4. That's a comma. It should be a period. We screwed up. Okay, so 5.4 have primary custody with supervised visitation to the ex-partner, which means the mother's lost primary custody. 17% have primary custody with unsupervised visit to the ex-partners. 19.6% have joint custody. 37% ex-partners have full custody. 17% respondents are on supervised visitation, and almost 21% have no contact at all. While 81% had primary custody at the time of separation, only 22.5% of the mothers were left with primary custody after the court proceeding. So I think that's kind of the nutshell finding, that what's happening in court is that mothers are failing to be protected, their children are failing to be protected, and they're losing their children in the process. So that's an overview of the descriptive statistics. So now I'm going to introduce Nancy Stubner now. And I need to do it for you, right? Okay, yeah. And she's going to present the work of her thesis, which does a rather sophisticated statistical analysis of this that allows us to look at whether or not it looks like some of these factors are related to the mother actually losing custody.
So as Jerry mentioned, Dr. Staley mentioned, I'm Nancy Stubner. Been her student for quite some time and working together since about 2000, helping to collect data with Connie. Oh, I'm sorry, yes. Oh, okay. I am going to pace. I'm a pacer and a pointer. Are we better? Sorry. I'm going to be pointing and pacing, so I hope this thing has kind of a long cord. So I'm a student. I've been with a student of Dr. Staley's for about 13 years. Now a colleague. Yeah, I'm a lecturer now at Cal State San Bernardino in psychology, obviously. So we've been working on this for quite some time. So as you just saw the overview, we've been collecting data from, we've been passing out the surveys to different conferences and collecting this data for quite some time. The thesis that I worked on actually takes a small subsample. We set some very strict criteria that I'll go over to show you exactly what kind of cases we were looking at. Just a brief background. We know, and we are here because we know that something's going wrong in the family court system when it comes to cases with child sexual abuse and with domestic violence. So the purpose of my study was to kind of dig a little bit more deeply into what might be going on in these cases when it has protective parents. A couple of studies of interest to us were Fowler and DeVoe in '95 found that the courts punished moms when they come in to protect their children from the court system. What they found was the more severe the abuse, the more the parent was penalized, the more sanctions that she was penalized with. So that was one study of concern. Another study of concern is Newstein and Goding in '99. They found, again, the outcome for protective parents is just dismal.
And this book, by the way,
Yes.
is on your table.
Yeah, is one of the authors. I
Is
think
the
it's
one,
Goding and Lesher, or Newstein and Lesher?
From Mutiny,
From Madness to
Madness
Mutiny?
to Mutiny,
Yeah.
and the study is actually in that book. I'm going to take a look at it later.
And so in '99, this was a study of great concern. In 20% of the cases, the allegedly sexually abusive parent was awarded primary physical and legal custody. 70% of cases, they had unsupervised visitation or joint custody, and then in only 10% of cases were the protective parent awarded primary physical and legal custody. So obviously these non-protective outcomes are of a big concern. So the purpose of the study was to take, a closer look. So the next slide we just want to look at custody outcomes that don't protect the child, and we have protective parents involved in child sexual abuse. We had 11 hypotheses, and it pretty much mentioned a lot of the things that Dr. Bernard talked about that are problematic for moms. So we expected the presence of the following factors would more likely lead to a custody outcome that would be not protective of the child. So when we had a mom who reported a higher number of children, when we had little financial resources, we're going to see how that's a big predictor. The presence of domestic violence is problematic. When mother reports having a mental health condition labeled prior to separation, or if she has a history of substance or alcohol abuse, if she reports having a criminal history, if she reports having participated in custody evaluations or participating in custody mediation, these factors are shown from the literature and just summarized so nicely in the first talk about these are things that are problematic for moms. Also, when moms were labeled with mental health condition labels during court proceedings, that's going to be problematic for her, as being labeling a PAS or alienator, and of course the presence of child sexual abuse. So when mother reports any of these factors, we expect them to be problematic for her, and we predict a less protective or non-protective outcome will occur.
Can I ask?
Oh, certainly, yes.
So, on the mental health thing, say it's labeled, but it's actually false. I'm just posing a question. So in other words, as long as they put the label in there and they don't investigate or they don't really check it out.
Yeah.
Bottom line is it doesn't really matter, because if they get the label in, that's all that matters.
Right, and we're calling it a label because we don't know if it was actually followed up upon or who gave the label. And
Right.
you'll see the questions on the
Yeah.
questionnaire, yeah, so we're calling it a label, but when they start throwing these things around, we're looking to see can it be problematic for the mom in court? Absolutely.
Whether it's true or not.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, yeah. So just a method summary. So the variables that we looked at, the predictor variables, are questions directly from the survey. I'm just going to focus briefly on the outcome variable, the custody outcome, right? Because there is a high overlap because of all the things that she can report, we kind of made this variable into 3 categories. And if you look on the back side of your survey at the very bottom, you'll see question number 97, custody, current custody arrangement. It has primary custody with me, so it would be primary custody with mom with supervised visitation to the father. Primary custody with me, meaning the mom, and unsupervised to father. Joint custody, full custody of the other parent, which would be the father. I'm on supervised visitation, or I have no contact, so mom has no contact, or other. If they marked other, mothers were very, they wanted to tell their story about what was happening with others, so I was able to categorize based on the details that they gave me for that other category. Of course, if it wasn't clear, we did not use that. So because of the high rate of overlap, because of one of the 7 outcomes, we have 3 categories. We have mother custody, which will include mother primary with supervised and unsupervised to father. We have joint custody, and then we have father custody, which is going to include cases where mother marks father has full custody, or that she is on supervised visitation, or that she has no contact with her children. So we have 3 outcomes that could occur. The larger sample, as you were told, has 399 cases. The current study is going to have 159 because I used very strict criteria to choose just cases where I could very clearly answer some of the questions that we have at hand. So I only chose cases where the respondent was the mother, because we did have a few dads. We're not using dads. These are all mothers only. And if mother reported yes to these questions, if she said the child positively identified the other parent as the perpetrator, clearly that's going to be the father. Where there was medical or physical evidence of abuse, and or was there corroborating evidence of abuse. So these are very strict criteria, but we can very clearly answer father's perpetrator, and there's something to back what mother is reporting. Okay. This one of the comparisons we wanted to make, and this kind of gives you this prior caretaker is the percentage of time that mother had caretaking time. We didn't ask at the time the survey was put together the custody outcome prior to court proceedings and then the custody outcome later. So I made a very rough estimate based on one of the questions on the front page of the questionnaire. So we have mother was the primary caretaker prior to separation. So we have this number here, we had 75 or 79% of mothers had prior caretaker time. And then after the court proceedings, we have 23% of mothers that were left with prior caretaker or with custody. With joint custody, prior time was about 20%, and then after the custody hearings, we had 15% were left with joint custody. And then we had prior to separation, fathers had 1% of primary custody or primary caretaker time. It wasn't a custody decision, but time. And then at the end, we had 63% of fathers who ended up with either he would have full custody, mother was on supervised visitation, or she had no contact with her children. And we ran a test, it's a McNamara, to see, and we can see from the numbers, we see a big shift here. And that shift was significant, meaning that it's not happening by chance. It's not happening by chance. Okay. This is just a little bit about the, one of the main statistics that we ran was a logistic regression, and we just put some of the variables into groups. We added to the statistical evaluation, and then as each group is added, it's predicting above and beyond the first group. So we added them in this order. I wasn't going to go too much into detail with this. I know eyes will glaze over, get to the good stuff. So, but if you have questions about this, I have everything that you could look at. So for the next one, oh, yeah. So the good stuff, results, right? Variables that reliably predicted father custody over mother custody at P less than 0.05 were bankruptcy and domestic violence. When mother reported bankruptcy, she was more likely to lose custody. When mother reported presence of domestic violence, again, more likely. And by P less than 0.05, what we mean by this is that we want to be very certain that the differences or the relationship, whatever it is we're saying about the variables under consideration, are not occurring by chance. So when we set something at P less than 0.05, we're saying that we're 95% confident that this is not a chance occurrence. These are real differences or a real relationship that's occurring. All right, so the next one, additional variables that reliably predicted father over mother custody, and we're adjusting it to the P less than 0.10, right, were criminal history and evaluator participation. When mom reported criminal history, less likely to be receive custody, or when she reported having participated in evaluator participation, she was less likely to receive custody. When we're looking at custody occurring joint versus father, these are variables that predicted father custody over joint custody. At P less than 0.05, we have domestic violence again popping up, that when she reported domestic violence, she was less likely to be given joint custody. Father was more likely to get custody. Criminal history again popping up as a reliably predictable variable. And evaluator participation again, problematic for mothers. And then finally, when we look at a P level of less than 0.10, we have child sexual abuse that is problematic. When a mother reports child sexual abuse is occurring, she's more likely to lose custody. Okay, or she's less likely to be awarded joint custody.
So father custody.
So father custody, yes. And I'm sorry, if you have questions, I don't mind that you stop me while I'm going on, but I just get on a tangent and I'll just go. So you'll have to really raise your hand high. Sorry. Okay, so let's find out what's going on. So when mothers are reporting bankruptcy, they are more likely to lose custody. Mothers reporting bankruptcy, more likely to lose custody. What could be going on? It's pretty straightforward. The ability of a mom who is a victim of domestic violence, her ability to afford legal counsel is a great concern. The literature indicates this, and our findings are in congruence with this. McBride found that custody is often lost in such cases, and we've kind of touched on that already today. Here's just support for what we learned about, and we saw how expensive it can be as well. So financial resource depletion puts moms at a disadvantage. In the current study, so for the thesis data, 28% of moms reported filing bankruptcy, and of course you saw in the larger study, 26.5% reported, complete financial depletion because of litigation costs. That question is very clear, because of litigation costs. When mothers reported being a victim of domestic violence, they were less likely to receive custody. Why? Well, one explanation might be that we have the power and control dynamic that occurs in a domestic violence relationship puts a mother at disadvantage in the family court. The father comes in, he's very confident, and he is very determined to punish the mother for leaving and for trying to protect the children. So he's going to come in, and it works. The adversarial process in the family court system works very well for him, but not very well for a mother who's just simply going in to try to protect herself or her children. So the family court system, and we kind of touched again on all the things that can go wrong there. One other explanation is the friendly parent provision. In fact, there's research out there that shows that when we have a state that has a friendly parent provision, so a parent who's like, yes, I'm amicable to making visitation arrangements with the other parent, so we have a friendly parent provision with also a presumption that favors joint custody. Moms who are trying to protect themselves or trying to protect their children are penalized. They're just not seen as the friendly parent to, they want to avoid contact or minimize contact just as a way of trying to protect themselves and their children. They're penalized for it when we have these things going on. So we saw that in our study as well. Absolutely. In terms of mothers with criminal history, when they reported a criminal history, they were less likely to be awarded custody, but in our sample, nearly half of the cases had to do with trying to protect their child. When mom is answering the survey and she's telling us something is going on in terms of her criminal history, we'll ask, what's going on with your criminal history, or explain. More than half of them had to, or nearly half of them had to do with trying to protect her children. So this raises some important questions that really need to be further investigated. Custody interference, it's no surprise that there's a gender bias in the family court system. The gender bias study reported that mothers are just kind of held to a higher standard, and when it comes to being accused of custody interference, moms get much harsher punishment, threatened with jail time, and fathers get a slap on the wrist if they're accused of interference with custody. So a couple of things that really need to be looked at is whether the father's criminal history is also, or is ignored, and also if the mother's attempts to protect their child are simply criminalized. Okay. Participation in custody evaluations also made it less likely for mothers to be awarded joint custody. Literature indicates some concerns that pop up with the role that custody evaluators play in making decisions in child sexual abuse cases, and we've kind of already talked about that. So in terms of clearly defined standards for the evaluations, for the things that they do have out there, there's just some very large concern about their role. Also lack of knowledge, a particular concern in terms of domestic violence training. When they asked the participants in their study, training ranged from little attendance at seminars to no formal training in domestic violence the previous 5 years. So they can go for as long as 5 years without having any up-to-date training, and sometimes being as little as just attending a seminar on this is where they're educating themselves. So our findings support this concern with custody evaluators. Now, when mothers reported child sexual abuse, again, they were less likely